Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Andre with We Built Different Legacy. We're going to be talking about the GOAT discussion again, part two. I'm going to sum this up in 10 minutes, make the runtime a little bit shorter. People can grasp what I'm talking about. Um, like before, the first time I ever did this, we were talking about the GOAT, greatest of all time. Most people think it was Jordan. Some people think it was Kobe. Some people will take it back and say it was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar with his longevity. Some people may say it was Wilt Chamberlain, his dominance. Um, and there's a lot of players in between that some people talk about as well. But I want to take it back to starting with Wilt Chamberlain. In a time where basketball was evolving and changing, um, even the black athlete coming to basketball, making it, I feel, more relevant. The game changed right away, obviously, when Wilt hit the floor. His presence, athleticism, and dominance was unmatched. Nobody can really guard him. Um, he could kind of do whatever he wanted on the court. First player to ever score 100 points. First player ever to average 50 points and 25 in a whole season. Um, and he did that as a center, even statistically leading, I think, the league in the time with assist. So it's like if you talk about pure dominance, like I feel like in a time where basketball was very different than it is today, he was a pure dominance. I feel like over any player in that era, and he could have done that up until almost this era because of how big he was, how much skill he has, athleticism, um, the way he approached the game was just unreal. Then we talk about Jordan and his dominance in the late 80s into the early 90s was this pure greatness. Athleticism was just gifted in so many different ways, but people think of he was just naturally gifted. No, he worked for what he did. Um, just like most of some of these players are, obviously are God's gift to earth when it comes to basketball. People think like, oh, I'll never be able to be that because he was gifted like that. Just because they're gifted something doesn't mean they didn't have to work to get to where they were or where they wanted to be. Jordan had to work very hard to get to his, potential to where it made him not just Air Jordan, it made him, Michael Jordan to where he was just beyond better than anybody else when it came to the game of basketball when he stepped on the hardwood. With his dribbling, his ability to shoot, his fadeaway, um, the way he jumped in the air, the way that he can hang in the air. And most people don't realize the size of his hands. He was able to palm a ball very easily compared to most, and he can make you look very, very, stupid just by the way he can pump fake and make it look like he was passing with those hands. And most people don't take into effect all those things, you know, about him. It wasn't just his pure athleticism and his ability to play better than anybody else, his strength, his power, his jumping ability. It was a lot more than that, but we don't um, shed light on that sometimes. We just think about Jordan three-peated twice, went to the final six times, never lost, greatest of all time, right? But we don't consider the losses, that he took on as a young player, who made him who he was, who generated that in him, that passion to want a championship, to fight for it. Because a lot of players, could have just gave up. He could have retired early and been like, I'm never going to win. He wasn't going to do that. That wasn't the player he was. He was a very humble dude. He had to take in consideration that he couldn't do it by himself anymore. He needed a good teammate. Chicago saw that. That's why they went out and got Phil. And then, when Scotty got there, that's when the Bulls transformed in that era into that dynasty team. It wasn't when he was, schooling everybody as the young kid from North Carolina who was dominating the game in the late 80s, because he dominated player to player. He didn't dominate from team to team. You know what I mean? Like, he never beat the Pistons. He never beat the Celtics. Like, he had to work super hard to get to where he was going. Obviously he did beat the Detroit Pistons at the very end, to win his first championship, I think in '90, against the Lakers. But also then, like, he beat an old Lakers team. He didn't beat the Showtime Lakers. Kareem had already retired. The Lakers were very injured during that series. They won the series to win his first title, which was awesome for him. But he never had to face them full strength with the Showtime Lakers. He never beat you know Larry Bird and the Boston Celtics. And he did beat an older Detroit team, but it was, how many times did he lose to them before that? They beat up on him, but it was great to see that he overcame the player who he was, and was able to finally, beat that team and go on and move past the Eastern Conference to win his first title. And then his second title came, and they beat the Seattle SuperSonics with Sean Kemp. Sean Kemp and Gary Payton and Douglas Shrimp, and it's like, and they beat the Trailblazers with Clyde Drexler and Terry Porter and Sam Bowie. It was just, those teams were great. They were good teams, but like, we have to consider the teams that he played weren't exactly the best teams. So you can't just say, like, because he won six, he's the greatest of all time. They weren't the best teams that he beat. There were better teams later in basketball in the 2000s, 2010s that were put together that were way better teams than those teams that he faced. They were the greatest. He was the greatest team during that time. It wasn't even fair. I mean, Chicago, like, was dominant in the Eastern Conference. There was no one going to stop them. The only team that even had a chance during that time, I think, were the Knicks, and they never could get past Jordan. Ewing can never beat Jordan. You know what I mean? And it's like, obviously they played, I think, Indiana as well, um, in those times. Orlando a couple times. Those are some great teams, but he never faced Olajuwon, um, in the finals. Olajuwon had left, or like he had never. I don't know if he had left, but he wasn't in the. They weren't in the picture anymore when he left basketball and came back. So he didn't beat that team. He would have beat that team. That would have been relevant. I think way more relevant in the 6-0 thing. Beating the Jazz twice. We can say the Jazz were a great team. They were just the best team in the Western Conference at the time. The Lakers were regrouping. Kobe was still young. But other than that, like, they had Karl Malone and John Stockton. It wasn't. They were a great duo. They weren't a dominant duo. I mean, they weren't. They weren't ever going to beat Scotty and Jordan, because it wasn't just Scotty and Jordan. They had other pieces during that time. They had shooters. They had Steve Kerr. They had Paxton at the time. They had B.J. Armstrong as one of their point guards. They had Horace Grant. They had a couple other big dudes. And it's like, people don't think it's relevant, but it is. I mean, his teams weren't garbage teams when they put together those teams in the '90s. Um, his '80s teams weren't very good. I think the only other good player he had in the '80s was Charles Oakley. Was a young, and he was like a big brother, to Michael Jordan. You know what I mean? Like, when he left, a piece of Michael, was hurt, because he kind of, Oakley took him under his wing. He was like his big brother. He made sure no one messed with Jordan on the floor. He was an enforcer, and then he went over to the Knicks. I think it ended his career. But it was, people don't remember those times. I'm not sure about the last one. I know the two they won with the Jazz, or the one against the Jazz. The last one I can't recall who it was against for some reason. Anyways, let's get back to the topic at hand. Like we were saying, like that was Michael Jordan's stint of the 6-0. Like he was dominating basketball in the 90s during that time. When he left basketball, did basketball, slip a little bit? Did it go down in TV ratings and all that? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it did or didn't. Um, Kobe was just coming in the league and he was starting to dominate with the Lakers. Olajuwon and Houston, I think, won back to back, and it was just a time to where the Bulls weren't relevant anymore, even though they were still good. But that was the shine when Shaq and Anthony Hardaway with the Orlando Magic were coming up as the best new duo. Like they were unstoppable together. But when it came to, I think, the finals and playing head to head with Olajuwon, Shaq couldn't do anything against Elijah. He was one of the best um, big men who ever played the game. He moved better than anybody could. He had such a great shot, and honestly, his ability to move his body the way he did, I mean, it was very uncomfortable for other centers to ever try to guard him because his fakes and pump fakes were just unreal. His footing was amazing. So like that's why I feel though I wish I would have saw the Rockets versus the Bulls in the finals. That would have been a cool finals. Um, but I know we're going a little bit off subject. But like even Hakeem Olajuwon was one of those greatest players that ever played in the league. But I don't know if he was in a GOAT discussion. He didn't have a stint for that long of being the GOAT. He was one of the greatest players I ever saw, center wise. But moving forward, let's talk about like Kobe Bryant and his stint with the Lakers. Him and Shaq were basically unstoppable, you know, in the early 2000s. Like they had one of the best runs ever when like I don't even think they lost almost I think less than like 2 games in one of the final years. Like it was like unreal. Nobody can beat them, and like they were untouchable. They weren't, and they went through some good teams, but even though some of the teams they faced are considered people say bum teams and like they weren't that great. The Lakers were dominant over any team, and during that time when they were together, if they would have stayed together, it would have been ridiculous, and they both would have been, in a GOAT discussion. Kobe's career alone was a GOAT discussion because he mimicked everything Jordan did. He practiced. He was a student of the game. He literally was a disciple of Jordan. You know what I mean? Like he studied basketball that closely to where everything he did was Jordan with with his own flair. And then he became Mamba, which was just lights out assassin, like killer. You weren't gonna slow him down on the court. He had literally better work ethic and just pure grit and grind for the game than any other player ever did. And most NBA players will say that, but a lot of them will always say like Michael's their goat, and it's like it's just the iconic thing is like that's who they saw growing up. Half of them they never even played against them. Kobe got to play against them, and I remember one time Kobe saying like, I think when that meeting with him, Phil Jackson, when he was with the Lakers and Jordan came in, he's like, I would kick your ass in 1-on-1. It was the funniest thing I remember hearing a story like that. But anyways, let's not get too far off subject. But yeah, Kobe, and during that time, and then when Shaq left and Kobe had to take the team under his wing, he went through those growing pains, not having that second, big or that duo that Jordan and Pippen were, Carl and Stockton were, and stuff like that. And it's like you saw it. The Lakers took a dip, but then when they got Gasol, like Kobe had to learn to entrust another player again, and then form other players around him to try to be just as good to get to that next level, championship level again. And he did. He won two more, which made him, a five Pete, a five ringer. Um, And most people think that was relevant for him to be considered a GOAT. Because like for me, growing up, that was my GOAT. Kobe Bryant was my GOAT. He was amazing to watch, and his killer instinct, his pure passion for the game, night in and night out, didn't take days off, fought through injuries, played through injuries. That was he was basically basketball. He was the definition of what basketball was and should be. And I wish players would still play like that, play through injury, wouldn't take nights off, stop taking rest. That's why he's considered, in that GOAT discussion, hands down. Not just his play, his pure, not just pure athleticism, because he wasn't the most athletic guy. There was guys that were better than him, talented wise. People talk about Tracy McGrady being better than him, Vince Carter, and like they just didn't have that everything that Kobe had. They were amazing players, but they didn't have that that Kobe had. And like people don't understand, like there's a difference between being good and great and good and then greatness. And it's like there's only a few players in NBA history you can literally say that about. And like that's why we have these discussions. That's why we talk about it. And it's like it's nothing. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with your opinion. Well, there isn't nothing wrong with it until like I have to hear it. I want to hear your side of it and why it is just Jordan or just Kobe. You know what I mean? Because this is why we have the open discussion. Because everybody will just say it and like not have any relevance behind it. If you don't have anything to back it up, it doesn't matter. Just because Jordan has 6 rings doesn't purely mean that he's the greatest of all time. And because he was dominating, in the early 80s, because he didn't dominate basketball in the 90s. He was great in the 90s. His team was. You remember his last three-peat? Like, if they wouldn't have had, Dennis Rodman, there's no way they would have won those titles. It wasn't just Jordan Pippen then. They needed somebody else. You know what I mean? Then they had other things that made them good. It wasn't just Jordan. And, like, people, like, don't remember that. And, like, I think Kobe did a little bit more with the teams that he had when he had to win the 2 without Shaq. He only had because there wasn't a whole lot of players on that team. You know what I mean? There weren't amazing players anymore when Kobe won those hard championships when he had to put his life, you know, into basketball through hell to get to those championships. He was exhausted after those. And like those teams weren't even close to some of the best teams, that ever played, in the championships that Jordan had and like that other players had. And it's crazy, like people don't even remember that, dude. Look back at those teams that Kobe won with. They were fucking ridiculous compared to Jordan's teams. So like you can purely say that Kobe won 5, and it was hard as hell to get to that 5. And that's just 5. He was still one short of Jordan, but does that make Jordan better because he won 6 or he never lost? It doesn't make him better. I don't think so. Because Kobe went to, I think he went to 8, maybe 7. I'm not sure. But like even so, like Jordan only went to 6. Just because he won 6 doesn't mean he could have went. He should have went to more. He should have went to 12. Do you think he would have went 12-0? Maybe. He did. He did shine in the playoffs. He did dominate. But we'll never know. He only went to 6. But moving forward, let's talk about LeBron James now. That kid came into the league at 18 years old, dominated basketball for 10 straight years. In every statistic category, as a player, a shooter, a passer, he was more dominant than any of those players before him. And while they were still in the league, and like Kobe was still in the league, but LeBron James was dominating the league. Kobe wasn't dominating the league anymore. He was a dominant force for the Lakers. And trust me, I am a Lakers fan for life. But LeBron James controlled the narrative in basketball during that time. Everybody wanted to stop him. Social media wanted to stop him. Sports writers wanted to stop him. The world wanted to stop him, and he still exceeded on every level. He passed and shot past every every statistic ever was put down. He passed it at a younger age. First to 10,000 points, first to 20,000. I think first to 5,000. All kinds of things that he had, and people don't really recognize, acknowledge, like greatness in pure form. He was doing it. So that's why, for me, that's why he's still considered the GOAT, or he can be considered a GOAT for sure. But like I'm saying, there's just too many things that go into it, and people will always, circle back. And it's like, it's too hard. It's too hard to pin down that. And I think it's just one of those things that we should always just have an open mind and open discussion about. Because I don't think anybody, there's not going to ever be, I think, a GOAT forever. I think things are supposed to be surpassed. I think things happen for a reason. He was, to me, the best basketball athlete in the last, 25 years. Outside of Kobe Bryant, he was pure dominance. I don't care how many championships he won or lost. He lost to two dynasties and a Dallas Mavericks team that was unstoppable during that time with Dirk Nowitzki. That's all you can say. I don't care how many times he lost to Steph Curry. Steph Curry's not better than LeBron James. I don't know why people ever even thought that or ever even think that. Steph Curry doesn't even think that. And it's like they have Steph Curry over Kobe Bryant, one of the best top 50 athletes, basketball players of all time. He doesn't even think he's better than Kobe. So anybody who votes on those things, it's just pure just nonsense. Writers, and honestly, don't even get me started on sports writers. I think half of them are hacks. They don't know shit. Stephen A's overrated, talks too damn much. Skip Bayless, same thing. Like they all have a bunch of crap that they talk about, and they obviously don't always have this. To me, the real facts. They have their own facts. Why they don't like players, why they like players. It's just bull. They didn't. They don't even go back to like acknowledging, like, to me, some of the other greats from way back, from Jerry West to Wilt Chamberlain, Moses Malone, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. They don't acknowledge those guys. Those guys were just as great as all the ones that they saw today when they started writing, when Michael Jordan was just untouchable, the best athlete of all time. And don't even get me started on, those type of guys, because like they're always going to have their opinion. They're the ones that, honestly, like, they make today's world in basketball, to me, just nasty. And they even make the world think so negatively of some of the players that are playing just because of the crap and garbage they put out through social media. And it's not fair to the players. Michael Jordan never had to deal with that. He was loved. He was looked up to. He was an icon to everybody in the sports world because he was doing stuff in basketball during a time where sports really weren't as relevant, in basketball anymore. So it's like, it's unfair. There wasn't social media putting him down, but he did go through his struggles. I know when his father died and everything, and people said he was, he was done, and he was delusional, and he left and like wanted to go play baseball. He still came back and whooped everybody's ass. And like, people are always gonna have some negative things to say about some of the greatest players to ever play this game, and including Jordan and Wilt. People said that he could have been better than he was if he wasn't always chasing women. He loved women. Who cares? And LeBron. And it's like, people talk about, if he didn't cry so much or flop so much and had a better attitude, he would have won more championships. No, he was a dominant force of his time. It doesn't matter what people say. He literally can do anything and everything anybody can ever do, plus some. And it wasn't even fair. Like, if you look back at his highlight reel, nobody can stop that dude. And tell me he couldn't have played in the 80s and the 90s. He wasn't tough. Dude, he would have 2 or 3 guys on his back and still making layups. He's a 260-pound, 65-pound specimen that nobody could have stopped, who was blazing speed, like, you're telling me guys would have stopped him? No, he just would have been tougher. You don't have to be tough in this league anymore. I guarantee he would have rose to the occasion and became tougher. Just like Michael did, just like Kobe did. They started hitting the weight rooms more. Michael did after Detroit was beating him up in the 80s. He hit the weight room more, got stronger. And Kobe did the same thing. And LeBron would have done the same thing. And he still does. That guy puts so much pressure on himself to make himself in the best shape possible to still run with these young cats that think that they can, you know, duel him one-on-one. And don't even get me started on these guys that don't give him the respect on the court. That dude